The greatest wealth any civilization can possess isn't gold, technology, or power. It's the courage to believe a stranger will do the right thing. The shuttle descended through a blanket of pale morning clouds as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the rolling countryside of western Pennsylvania, painting fields of corn, apple orchards, and weathered red barns in soft shades of amber. Valus watched the landscape through the transparent alloy canopy without speaking. Every detail streamed into her neural interface as billions of calculations quietly unfolded behind her calm golden eyes. Atmospheric composition, acceptable. Agricultural efficiency, moderate. Economic indicators, inconsistent. Security infrastructure, insufficient. Her artificial intelligence assistant projected countless blue markers across the terrain below, highlighting roads, vehicles, commercial buildings, and eventually a gathering of nearly 200 temporary vendor stalls arranged in neat rows beside a small community park. The display pulsed once before a warning appeared across the center of her vision. Security risk, extreme. Unguarded commercial activity detected. Probability of organized theft, 97.4%. Valus narrowed her eyes. That result made no sense. Every registered trade world inside the Galactic Commerce Accord required layered security fields, biometric ownership verification, armed response drones, and encrypted inventory monitoring for even the smallest public marketplace. Entire economies had collapsed after civilizations underestimated opportunistic crime during their early development. The historical records were painfully clear. Yet Earth continued appearing as an anomaly inside every report. She had dismissed those reports as statistical errors until today. The shuttle landed silently several hundred yards away behind a grove of maple trees. Its hull shifted colors to blend naturally with the shadows, while Valus stepped onto Earth for the first time. The cool summer air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass, roasted coffee, warm bread, peaches, basil, and damp soil still holding traces of last night's rain. Somewhere nearby, children laughed as a golden retriever eagerly chased a bright red frisbee across an open field. Wind chimes gently danced beneath the porch of an old farmhouse beyond the market. Everything felt unguarded. She adjusted the elegant silver folds of her merchant attire, its advanced fibers disguising themselves as an expensive but ordinary traveler's coat. To everyone else, she appeared to be a tall foreign visitor with remarkably graceful posture and unusual eyes that reflected sunlight almost like polished amber glass. Nothing about her hinted at civilizations spanning hundreds of star systems. As she approached the farmer's market, another alert quietly appeared. 48 stalls currently contained unattended merchandise. 23 vendors temporarily absent. 0 active surveillance systems detected. 0 defensive drones. 0 weapon signatures. Her AI hesitated before adding a final conclusion. Estimated financial survival under standard galactic conditions, less than 1 business cycle. Valus slowed her steps. Wooden tables overflowed with tomatoes, sweet corn, honey jars, handmade candles, fresh flowers, homemade pies, and colorful baskets filled with blueberries. Small handwritten signs listed prices. Cash boxes rested openly beside the products. Some booths even displayed simple instructions. Take what you need. Please leave payment here. She looked around carefully, expecting concealed officers or hidden monitoring equipment. There were none. People wandered casually between the stalls, smiling, chatting, sampling peaches, complimenting handmade quilts, and greeting complete strangers as though they had known one another for years. An elderly woman stepped away from her vegetable stand to hug a friend across the walkway, leaving everything completely exposed. Nobody rushed toward her empty table. Nobody reached for the unattended cash. Valus stood perfectly still as another warning echoed softly inside her thoughts. Error. Observed human behavior does not match predictive models. Recalculating. She continued staring at the quiet marketplace while, for the first time in her distinguished career as an interstellar merchant, she wondered whether every lesson her civilization had ever taught about prosperity had begun with the wrong assumption. Valus forced herself to continue walking, although every instinct shaped by decades of interstellar commerce urged her to remain cautious. The market was alive in a way no trading district on her home world had been for centuries. There were no holographic advertisements competing for attention, no security announcements echoing through the air, and no metallic patrol units gliding silently between customers. Instead, she heard conversations that wandered without purpose. People discussed the weather, shared recipes, compared tomatoes, laughed about a fishing trip, and congratulated a young couple carrying their first basket of homegrown vegetables. Every interaction seemed inefficient by galactic standards, yet strangely valuable. Her wrist interface quietly captured thousands of behavioral samples, while the prediction engine struggled to classify what it was seeing. Human cooperation exceeded expected levels by 48%. Casual verbal exchanges occurred without measurable commercial advantage. Average smiling frequency remained statistically abnormal. The system finally displayed a single unfamiliar notification. Confidence in current economic model decreasing. Across the market, a pickup truck rolled into an empty parking space beside a weathered white barn. A tall man stepped out carrying 2 wooden crates filled with fresh peaches. His faded denim shirt was rolled to his elbows, and years of honest work had left quiet strength in his shoulders without making him appear intimidating. His movements were steady, practiced, almost effortless. He greeted 3 different vendors before reaching his own stall. Every greeting included a name instead of a title. Every smile appeared genuine. Daniel Brooks placed the peaches onto a display already overflowing with sweet corn, tomatoes, squash, wildflower honey, and homemade apple butter. Small handwritten labels sat beside each basket, their ink slightly faded from countless sunny weekends. A simple wooden box rested near the front with a handwritten sign that read, "Cash or card accepted. Thank you for supporting local farms." Velas immediately scanned the container. It contained nearly $400 in bills and coins. No lock, no alarm, no biometric seal. Daniel glanced at his watch, looked across the walkway toward another vendor, then called out, "Mary, I am grabbing a coffee. Watch my tomatoes if they decide to run away." Laughter spread through the nearby stalls. Mary laughed harder than anyone else. "I will do my best, but those heirlooms have looked suspicious all morning." Daniel chuckled, adjusted one crooked basket, and simply walked away. He disappeared toward a small coffee stand at the far end of the market. Velas froze. Her eyes immediately returned to the unattended cash box. Her interface flashed bright amber. Stall abandoned. Valuable inventory exposed. Merchant absent. Estimated probability of theft during owner absence, 96.8%. She remained where she was, expecting someone to approach cautiously, glance around, and quietly pocket a few bills before leaving unnoticed. Instead, an elderly man selected 2 peaches, examined them with care, counted several dollar bills from his wallet, placed the exact amount into the wooden box, and smiled despite the absence of any witness. A teenage girl picked up a jar of honey, used a mobile payment application to complete the purchase, and left after carefully straightening the display she had accidentally bumped. Moments later, a young mother noticed one of her children reaching curiously toward a basket of ripe strawberries. Before the little boy could touch them, she gently held his hand and whispered, "Those belong to Mr. Brooks until we pay for them." The child nodded without complaint. Velas felt the familiar certainty of mathematics slipping through her fingers. Every equation her civilization trusted insisted that opportunity eventually defeated integrity. Yet opportunity surrounded these people like sunlight, and integrity remained quietly untouched. Somewhere beyond the coffee stand, Daniel laughed at something another farmer had said, completely unaware that the greatest mystery in the market was no longer the produce on his tables. It was the extraordinary confidence with which he had simply walked away. Velas quietly stepped away from Daniel's stall and positioned herself beneath the shade of an old maple tree overlooking the center of the market. From there she could observe nearly every pathway without drawing attention to herself. Her internal sensors reduced unnecessary notifications, allowing her to focus on individual choices instead of statistical averages. She had spent years evaluating civilizations by measuring infrastructure, trade efficiency, manufacturing output, and military stability. None of those reports had ever instructed her to watch how strangers behaved when they believed nobody important was looking. The morning sunlight climbed higher, warming the wooden roofs above the vendor booths while a gentle breeze carried the scent of cinnamon pastries and fresh basil through the open square. Somewhere nearby, A local musician began playing an old acoustic guitar. The melody drifted lazily between conversations like another familiar neighbor stopping to say hello. Velis activated a silent observation mode. She wanted evidence. A woman purchasing fresh flowers counted her bills too quickly and accidentally placed $20 into the cash box instead of 10. She walked several yards before stopping abruptly. No one called after her. No alarm sounded. She simply looked down at the empty space in her hand, smiled at herself, and returned to Daniel's unattended stall. She carefully opened the wooden box, removed one $10 bill, whispered, "Math before coffee," and continued on her way. The interface around Velis highlighted the event. Voluntary financial correction. External enforcement absent. Confidence interval exceeded acceptable limits. Before she could process the anomaly, another appeared. An elderly gentleman carrying a paper bag noticed a leather wallet resting beneath a nearby bench. He slowly picked it up and looked around. The market continued moving naturally. Nobody seemed aware that anything had been misplaced. The man opened the wallet only far enough to find an identification card, then walked directly toward a young family examining jars of homemade jam. "Excuse me," he called politely. "I believe this belongs to you." The father touched his back pocket, and his expression immediately changed from confusion to relief. "I cannot thank you enough," he said sincerely. The older man only smiled. "Someday you will do the same for somebody else." He refused the offered reward and continued shopping as though nothing remarkable had happened. Velis watched every heartbeat of the exchange. Her civilization rewarded honesty with financial incentives because honesty without compensation had become almost non-existent centuries earlier. Here, gratitude alone seemed sufficient. Minutes later, another quiet surprise unfolded. A teenage boy carrying a basket of vegetables approached Daniel's empty stall with a small paper receipt in his hand. He looked around, found no one, then gently placed $2 beside the register. A woman arranging peaches at the neighboring booth noticed him. "Everything all right?" she asked. The teenager nodded with an embarrassed smile. "Yesterday, Mr. Brooks charged me for 6 ears of corn, but I counted this morning and realized he accidentally gave me 7. I owed him $2. The woman laughed softly. "He probably would not have noticed." The boy shrugged. "I would have." He tucked the receipt into the cash box and walked away. Velis remained perfectly still as another calculation collapsed. Her predictive engine attempted 7 separate behavioral models before abandoning every one of them. It finally displayed a message she had never witnessed during any mission. Insufficient data. Existing civilization profiles cannot explain observed conduct. Recommend direct human interaction. At that exact moment, Daniel returned carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. Instead of drinking both himself, he handed one to the elderly woman at the neighboring booth without saying a word. She accepted it with a grateful smile that suggested this quiet kindness had happened many times before. Velis realized she was no longer studying a marketplace. She was witnessing a language that required no translation because trust itself had become the conversation. Velis had not intended to interfere. Observers were trained to remain invisible until every conclusion rested on verified evidence instead of emotion. Yet the quiet confidence surrounding Daniel Brooks continued dismantling assumptions that had guided her entire profession. Her wrist interface projected a private recommendation directly into her vision. Controlled integrity assessment advised. Probability of revealing hidden criminal behavior, 89%. She hesitated only a moment before accepting the protocol. Hidden inside the lining of her coat rested a small metallic case no larger than a hardcover novel. To human eyes, it resembled an elegant travel organizer with polished silver corners and a smooth black surface. In reality, it contained a compact quantum transaction core capable of authorizing commercial exchanges worth more than the annual economy of several frontier colonies. Losing such a device anywhere in the Galactic Commerce Accord would trigger immediate lockdown procedures. On Earth, however, there would be no alerts, no emergency broadcasts, no orbital response team. That was precisely why she chose it. She carried the case casually toward Daniel's produce stand while pretending to study the baskets of peaches. The market remained comfortably busy. Families wandered between vendors carrying reusable shopping bags. Children sampled slices of watermelon offered by a cheerful orchard owner. Someone nearby complimented the smell of fresh sourdough bread, as another customer patiently waited in line for homemade cinnamon rolls. The atmosphere remained astonishingly relaxed. Valus carefully placed the silver case beside one of Daniel's wooden crates, making certain it would be visible without appearing intentionally displayed. She glanced around one final time before turning away as though distracted by another booth across the walkway. Her heart remained calm, but her analytical systems accelerated dramatically. Observation sequence initiated. Asset value intentionally concealed. Monitoring all surrounding movement. Minutes passed. An elderly couple noticed the case, but assumed it belonged to the vendor. A young girl pointed toward it before her father gently reminded her not to touch things that were not theirs. A college student reached for a basket of tomatoes, accidentally brushed the edge of the case with his sleeve, then immediately placed it back exactly where he had found it. Every passing second pushed the probability charts farther outside accepted scientific limits. Then Daniel looked down while arranging fresh peaches. He frowned with mild curiosity, picked up the unfamiliar silver case with both hands, and examined it for barely a second before looking around the crowd. There was no excitement in his face, no suspicion, only concern that someone might be searching for something important. He stepped out from behind his stall and began walking through the market at an easy pace. "Did somebody leave this?" he asked a nearby family. They shook their heads. He asked another vendor, then another customer. Every person stopped what they were doing long enough to look carefully before answering. Nobody ignored him. Nobody suggested opening it. Nobody joked about keeping it. They simply helped. Valus watched from the opposite side of the market, unable to reconcile what she was seeing with every commercial security doctrine she had ever memorized. Daniel continued searching for several minutes before his eyes settled on her. She had deliberately positioned herself beside a stand selling handmade pottery, pretending to admire a ceramic bowl. He approached with an easy smile that carried neither accusation nor caution. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said warmly. "This might sound like an odd question, but did you happen to leave this behind?" He gently held out the silver case with both hands, treating it less like valuable property and more like something carrying another person's peace of mind. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Valus found herself speechless. Her interface waited for classification, but no category existed for a civilization where complete strangers instinctively protected wealth they could never comprehend simply because it belonged to someone else. Valus accepted the silver case with deliberate calm, carefully hiding the wave of disbelief moving beneath her composed expression. "Yes," she said softly. "It belongs to me. Thank you." Daniel smiled as though returning an item worth a few dollars instead of a device capable of authorizing fortunes across entire star systems. "I figured somebody would be looking for it," he replied. "I know how it feels to think you have lost something important." There was no curiosity in his voice. He did not ask what was inside. He did not ask where she came from or why someone traveling alone carried such an expensive-looking case. Once it had safely reached its owner, the matter seemed finished in his mind. That simplicity unsettled Valus more than any sophisticated interrogation could have. She looked at him for a long moment before asking the question that had echoed through her thoughts since stepping into the market. "You never considered opening it?" Daniel chuckled quietly. "No, ma'am. If it is yours, then what is inside is your business." "You were not curious?" she asked. "Of course I was," he admitted with an easy grin. "Being curious and acting on curiosity are two different things." His answer settled into the silence between them with surprising weight. On her world, curiosity justified investigation. Information itself had become a commodity centuries earlier. Privacy existed only where contracts demanded it. Yet this human spoke as though self-restraint required no explanation. Daniel glanced toward his stall and noticed another customer waiting patiently beside the baskets of peaches. "Would you mind walking with me?" he asked. "I should get back before somebody decides my tomatoes really can run away." Valus found herself smiling before she realized she had done it. Together they crossed the market at an unhurried pace. People greeted Daniel from nearly every direction. A young boy proudly held up an unusually shaped carrot. An elderly woman thanked him for recommending a peach variety the previous week. A firefighter carrying 2 bags of vegetables waved from across the parking lot. Daniel remembered every name without hesitation. Valus quietly observed each interaction. None appeared rehearsed. None carried hidden expectations. They resembled threads woven into something larger than commerce. When they reached his stall, Daniel stepped behind the wooden table and began arranging produce, while continuing the conversation naturally. "Are you visiting from out of state?" he asked. Velis considered how much truth she could safely offer. "Very far away," she answered. "That explains why you have been studying everything like it is your first time seeing a farmer's market." She tilted her head slightly. "Was it that obvious?" "Not to everyone," Daniel said. "But I notice people. Farmers spend most of their lives paying attention. Weather, soil, insects, trees, people. Everything tells a story if you slow down enough." Velis looked around at the open cash box, the unattended baskets, the relaxed customers drifting through the rows of stalls. "May I ask you something?" she said. Daniel nodded. "Why do you leave your business so exposed? Surely you know someone could take your money while you are gone." Daniel rested both hands on the weathered wooden table and looked across the market before answering. His eyes settled on a little girl proudly carrying flowers almost too large for her arms while her grandfather walked beside her. "People ask me that every once in a while," he said quietly. "The truth is, locks protect things. Trust protects people. If I build my whole life expecting everybody to disappoint me, eventually that is all I will ever see." Velis listened without interrupting. Daniel picked up a peach, brushed away a tiny speck of dust with his thumb, and placed it carefully back into the basket. "Most folks around here are trying to take care of their families just like I am. So I choose to treat them that way first. Maybe trust does not always work, but somebody has to be willing to offer it before anybody else can return it." For the first time since leaving her home among the stars, Velis wondered whether the strongest foundation for any civilization had never been technology at all, but the quiet decision made by ordinary people to believe the best about one another before they had proof. Daniel's words lingered in Velis's thoughts long after the conversation drifted naturally toward peaches, weather forecasts, and the challenges of keeping tomato plants healthy through unusually humid summers. She remained beside the stall instead of continuing her survey, quietly watching customers arrive and leave while sunlight slowly shifted across the wooden tables. Every few minutes, Daniel greeted another familiar face. Sometimes the exchange lasted only a few seconds. Sometimes it stretched into conversations about grandchildren, church picnics, fishing at the nearby lake, or whether this year's apple harvest might arrive a week early. None of those discussions increased sales directly. According to every commercial model Velis had studied, they represented wasted time. Yet the steady flow of customers never slowed. In fact, many appeared to visit Daniel less because of the vegetables and more because they genuinely enjoyed seeing him. Her interface quietly attempted another economic projection before pausing once again. Social trust positively influencing long-term commercial stability. Mechanism not fully understood. The conclusion would have been dismissed by any academy on her home world. There, efficiency had replaced familiarity generations ago. Transactions happened almost instantly through automated exchanges. Buyers rarely met sellers. Artificial intelligence negotiated prices. Goods traveled through orbital distribution systems without anyone speaking a single word. Markets had become silent corridors of flawless precision where every movement was monitored and every purchase permanently recorded. Theft had nearly disappeared, but so had conversation. Children learned financial protocols before they learned the names of neighboring families. Homes resembled secure vaults protected by layered biometric locks. Even shared gardens required encrypted access permissions. No one questioned those systems because everyone believed security demanded permanent suspicion. Velis herself had never doubted that principle. Until now. She watched as Daniel accepted a basket of homemade cookies from an elderly woman who insisted he had helped prepare her fence the previous month. He laughed, thanked her, and immediately placed the cookies on the table with a handwritten note inviting anyone to enjoy one free of charge. A construction worker stopped by, picked up a cookie, purchased vegetables, and left an extra $5 in the donation jar for the local volunteer fire department sitting beside the register. Nobody announced the contribution. Nobody applauded it. The gesture disappeared into the rhythm of the morning as naturally as birds singing from the nearby oak trees. "You are thinking very hard," Daniel observed with a friendly smile while arranging another basket of sweet corn. Velis looked toward him. "Where I come from, Markets do not sound like this. What do they sound like? He asked. She searched carefully for words that revealed truth without exposing more than necessary. Mostly machines, she answered quietly. Doors opening. Security systems verifying identities. Automated announcements reminding everyone to protect their property. Conversations are uncommon. Daniel rested one hand on the wooden counter. That sounds lonely. The answer arrived so simply that Velas almost dismissed it. Yet she realized she could not remember the last ordinary conversation she had shared with someone who expected nothing in return. Every discussion in her professional life had involved negotiations, contracts, strategy, or calculated outcomes. Even friendships often formed through commercial partnerships. She had accepted that reality without recognizing what had quietly disappeared along the way. A little girl approached the stall holding a $1 bill tightly in both hands. She looked up at Daniel with complete seriousness. Do I have enough for one peach? Daniel smiled warmly. You sure do. As he placed the largest peach from the basket into her hands, her grandfather gently whispered, That one costs more. Daniel simply winked. Today it costs $1. The little girl beamed with delight before skipping away, holding the peach like a priceless treasure. Velas watched Daniel return to arranging his display as though nothing unusual had happened. You lost money, she said softly. Daniel shook his head. Maybe today, he replied. But I have a feeling she will remember this market for the rest of her life. Velas looked across the rows of open stalls shimmering beneath the warm afternoon sun and began to understand something her civilization had forgotten. Perhaps the strongest economies were not built by protecting every coin. Perhaps they were built by investing quietly in people until trust itself became the most valuable harvest anyone could bring home. The first hint arrived not as a warning, but as silence. The cheerful melody from the guitar player faded as a cool breeze swept across the market, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of approaching rain. Above the rows of colorful tents, bright blue skies slowly surrendered to thick gray clouds gathering over the distant hills. Daniel glanced upward for only a second before smiling knowingly. Summer weather around here likes to make up its mind at the last minute, he said as he reached beneath the table and pulled out a folded canvas cover. Around the market, experienced vendors reacted almost instinctively. Some secured lightweight displays with small sandbags. Others rolled down fabric shades or tucked paper signs beneath baskets. Nobody panicked. The atmosphere remained calm, almost routine. Velas watched with growing curiosity. Her atmospheric sensors confirmed that a fast-moving storm cell would arrive within minutes, bringing strong wind and heavy rain. On countless worlds she had visited, such conditions would immediately trigger emergency asset protection protocols. Vendors would secure their own property first. Automated barriers would isolate commercial zones. Insurance drones would begin documenting inventory before the first raindrop touched the ground. Here, there were only neighbors preparing together. A sudden gust swept through the open square, lifting loose napkins into the air and rattling wooden signs against their hooks. One of the larger canopy tents near the center of the market shuddered violently before one of its support poles slipped from the damp grass. The entire structure leaned sideways, threatening to spill dozens of baskets filled with fresh produce onto the ground. Before Velas could even process what was happening, Daniel was already moving. He caught one corner of the canopy with both hands while another farmer hurried to stabilize the opposite side. A young couple abandoned their own shopping bags to help secure the remaining poles. Across the walkway, 3 high school students ran toward a vendor struggling to gather jars of homemade jam before the wind could scatter them. Nobody asked whose booth it was. Nobody stopped to calculate whether helping would cost them sales. Action flowed through the market as naturally as conversation had earlier that morning. Velas found herself stepping forward without conscious thought. She reached a nearby flower stand, just as several lightweight buckets began tipping toward the edge of a table. Using careful precision, she steadied the display while an elderly florist quickly tied down the canvas roof above them. Thank you, dear, the woman said with a grateful smile before immediately turning to help another vendor whose folding table had shifted several inches across the pavement. Rain finally arrived in soft, steady sheets that drummed gently against canvas roofs and wooden crates. The air filled with the rich scent of wet earth, fresh herbs, and summer leaves. Customers did not flee. Many stayed to hold tent poles, move boxes beneath shelter, or carry baskets of vegetables to safer locations. Children laughed as they hurried together beneath oversized umbrellas while adults worked side by side with remarkable ease. Daniel noticed an older beekeeper struggling to move several heavy honey boxes away from the edge of his booth. Without hesitation, he jogged across the market, leaving his own stall completely unattended once again. Valus instinctively turned toward the abandoned cash box, expecting the confusion of the storm to create the perfect opportunity for dishonesty. Instead, something even more extraordinary unfolded. A customer quietly placed exact payment into the box before covering it with Daniel's folded towel to keep the bills dry. Another shopper carefully moved 2 baskets of tomatoes farther beneath the canopy so the rain would not damage them. A teenage boy picked up several peaches that had rolled onto the table and arranged them neatly back into their basket before walking away without taking one for himself. No one claimed ownership over the kindness they offered. It simply passed from one person to another, invisible and uninterrupted, like the rain nourishing every field without deciding which crops deserved to grow. Standing beneath the gentle rhythm of falling water, Valus realized she was witnessing something far rarer than honesty. She was watching an entire community protect one another's livelihoods as though every stall belonged to all of them. And for the first time in her life, that idea seemed not only possible, but perfectly logical. The rain lasted barely 20 minutes before drifting east across the hills, leaving the farmer's market washed clean beneath a sky slowly returning to brilliant shades of blue. Sunlight broke through scattered clouds, turning countless drops of water into tiny flashes of gold across every tent and wooden table. The market did not celebrate surviving the storm because, in the minds of everyone present, they had simply done what neighbors were supposed to do. Vendors thanked one another with quiet smiles before returning to their customers. Someone poured fresh coffee for the volunteers who had spent the last several minutes securing tents. Children resumed chasing one another through the open pathways, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Only Valus remained standing in thoughtful silence, watching ordinary people move through an ordinary afternoon that had quietly overturned centuries of accepted economic theory. She stepped away from the crowd and walked toward the small grove of maple trees where her shuttle remained hidden beneath adaptive camouflage. Once she stood beyond the view of the market, she raised her wrist and allowed the silver interface to awaken completely. Layers of holographic symbols expanded into the air before her, replacing the appearance of an ordinary traveler's bracelet with the unmistakable command console of a senior observer of the Galactic Commerce Authority. A secure transmission channel opened instantly. Dozens of encrypted signals requested her preliminary findings. Central Command expected a recommendation based upon resource output, industrial capacity, strategic value, transportation, infrastructure, and commercial security. Those were the categories every candidate civilization had always been judged by. Beneath the familiar evaluation screen, one additional line quietly appeared. Senior Observer Alpha Authority confirmed. Preliminary first contact recommendations eligible for expedited provisional review. Valus looked back toward the market before beginning her report. Her voice remained calm, but something inside it had changed. Field Evaluation 712, she said. Senior Observer Valus reporting. The interface acknowledged her identity. Proceed with commercial assessment. She remained silent for several seconds. For the first time in her career, every prepared evaluation template felt inadequate. Finally, she spoke. Industrial capability is developing steadily. Agricultural productivity remains regionally efficient. Infrastructure continues expanding. She paused once more as images from the morning replayed inside her memory. Daniel returning a mysterious silver case without opening it. A child paying honestly when nobody watched. Strangers protecting one another's market before protecting their own belongings. A community choosing trust repeatedly without expecting recognition. None of those moments fit inside any official category. Additional findings, the system requested. Valus slowly closed several standard evaluation windows until only one blank section remained. Remarks. She had never used it before. Existing assessment protocols are incomplete, she said quietly. Observed human commercial behavior cannot be accurately measured through conventional security analysis. The transmission system hesitated before requesting clarification. Explain anomaly. Valus looked toward Daniel's stall in the distance. He was laughing with another farmer while replacing a basket of peaches beneath the warm afternoon sunlight. The cash box remained unlocked. Customers continued arriving. Nothing had changed because nothing needed to change. Earth demonstrates an uncommon economic foundation, she continued. Trust is functioning as an active commercial asset rather than a measurable liability. Community relationships consistently reduce transactional risk without technological enforcement. Citizens voluntarily protect both personal and shared property despite frequent opportunities for dishonest gain. Cooperative behavior appears culturally reinforced across multiple generations. Several indicators flashed across the display as distant analysts reviewed her words in real time. Another notification followed almost immediately. Observer Alpha Authority permits provisional admission recommendations pending formal council ratification. Valus remembered every world she had visited where magnificent cities hid behind security barriers, and every marketplace where fear had become so ordinary that no one questioned it anymore. Then she remembered a little girl carrying the largest peach she had ever seen, believing kindness was simply how adults behaved. Her decision required no further calculation. She pressed her hand against the glowing interface. Recommendation, she said with complete certainty. Grant Earth Provisional Commercial Partnership under First Contact Observer Protocol. The interface remained silent for several long seconds before a final response appeared. Preliminary recommendation accepted. Provisional partnership authorized. Full council review scheduled upon mission completion. The system requested one final supporting statement to accompany the official record. Valus smiled gently as she watched Daniel wave to another customer whose name he somehow remembered. Reason, the interface asked. She answered with the simplest truth she had discovered anywhere among the stars. This civilization protects its markets by first protecting the character of its people, and that is a form of wealth no technology has ever been able to manufacture. Several days later, while Daniel was repairing a fence beneath the warm Pennsylvania sun, Valus received the final transmission aboard her cloaked shuttle. The encrypted message unfolded slowly above her wrist, no longer carrying the urgency of a battlefield report, but the weight of history. Final Council ratification complete. Earth officially admitted into the Galactic Commerce Accord. Her preliminary recommendation had survived every review, every challenge, and every debate among civilizations that had spent centuries believing security could only be purchased through stronger technology. She had expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt something much quieter. Relief. It surprised her because the decision had not simply changed Earth's future. It had changed her own. For years, she had believed prosperity was built by eliminating uncertainty. A quiet farmer's market had shown her that the strongest economies were built by giving trust a place to grow. She deactivated the command interface, and the advanced holograms disappeared until nothing remained except the appearance of an ordinary silver bracelet. Before departing Earth, she returned one final time to the farmer's market. Daniel was loading the last wooden crates into the back of his aging pickup truck. The afternoon crowd had thinned, leaving only a handful of vendors exchanging leftovers, folding tables, and wishing one another a safe drive home. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth, fresh peaches, and warm sunshine drying the pavement. Daniel looked up as she approached. "Looks like you came back," he said with an easy smile. Valus returned the smile. "I had one last piece of business to finish." He rested another crate inside the truck. "Well, you picked a good day for it." She reached into the pocket of her coat and removed a small polished coin unlike any object ever minted on Earth. It reflected sunlight with shifting patterns that resembled distant stars moving beneath clear water. She placed it gently on the wooden table between them. Daniel studied it with quiet curiosity, but did not touch it. "What is it?" he asked. "A merchant's honor token," Valus answered. "It is awarded only when one merchant permanently changes another." Daniel laughed softly. "I am pretty sure I did not do anything special." "That is precisely why you earned it," she replied. He looked at her more carefully, sensing that she was no longer hiding behind careful answers. Valus drew a slow breath. "I did not come here as a tourist. I came to determine whether Earth should one day trade with civilizations beyond your sky." Daniel smiled. Politely, assuming she was joking. Then the silver bracelet surrounding her wrist unfolded into a ring of silent holographic light. Tiny symbols floated through the afternoon air before dissolving into nothing. The breeze lifted a strand of her pale champagne-colored hair as sunlight ignited the golden reflections inside her eyes. Daniel's smile slowly disappeared. He looked from the impossible technology to her face, then toward the peaceful market surrounding them. After several long seconds, he let out a quiet breath. "You were serious?" Valus nodded once. Everything depended upon one question. Could humans be trusted? Daniel looked around as neighbors helped one another load trucks without anyone asking. Someone returned a forgotten basket. Another family stayed behind simply to sweep the walkway before leaving. He smiled, still trying to understand the impossible standing before him. "I hope we gave you the right answer." Valus gently shook her head. "No, you gave us a better question." He frowned slightly. "What question?" She looked across the rows of unlocked stalls glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. "My people spent centuries asking how to build stronger locks. We never stopped asking how to build neighbors." Neither of them spoke after that. They simply watched as ordinary kindness continued without anyone realizing history had already changed. High above the market, hidden beyond the blue sky, the Galactic Commerce Authority quietly released its first revised commerce standards in nearly 5 centuries. Security ratings would no longer be determined only by surveillance systems, defensive technology, or theft statistics. Every future merchant seeking interstellar certification would study one mandatory case before receiving a license. Earth Trust Commerce Protocol. Its benchmark was neither a fortress nor a capital city. It was a small farmer's market where ordinary people protected one another before protecting themselves. Daniel never learned that future merchants across hundreds of worlds would study the quiet choices he believed were simply common decency. As he closed the tailgate of his old pickup and waved goodbye to friends whose names he would remember for the rest of his life, Valus looked at the peaceful market one last time and realized that among all the remarkable things humanity would one day share with the stars, trust had become its first and greatest export.